Oh, and we're live. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Just coming on a few seconds early to make sure we can act okay. Mm. It's the 3rd of March. Thanks very much for joining us here at the Doghouse for our Dune Book Club. If you're about there tonight, say hello. We're about to start with chapter 14 tonight. We'll just give it a wee minute for 9 o'clock to hit before we get going. Excuse me. So it's a gorgeous day here today. Every time we've been on lately, we've been hit by storms so much. I was actually checking the news, and we had 3 in a row in 1 week. So it's been absolutely delightful day here today, and the sky has been so blue. And evening, Babs. Babs is saying evening, dog. Hello, how are you doing? Yeah, just saying, Babs. It's been such a beautiful day here today. I got to get some sunshine and a beautiful blue sky. Just get the dogs out. It was absolutely nice, gorgeous, very refreshing because I said it feels like we've battened down the hatches for quite a while. If you know what I mean. Just we've been getting battered here in Northern Ireland with storms, storm after storm. So it's still a bit chilly today, but it's been absolutely gorgeous. And I actually got to see a lot of the stars the other night when I was out dandering about. Bob saying our day here has been glorious as well. Excellent. It's nice, isn't it, to have a good day? We've been having such bad weather, and the tail end of February in Northern Ireland tends to be our harshest part of winter. To be honest with you, there's Bojack Harkness saying, "Hey all, hey Bojack, how you doing? Thanks for joining us." And I suppose just in light of we were having a wee bit of a chat the other week before we get started, I wanted to point out something that as much as we were looking at the previous chapter, and I don't know what was it. I pointed something out about. I suppose it was about a conversation that Thufir Hawat and Leto have about Jessica's parentage and the possibility, I suppose, that she could be an orphan and out to revenge upon parents that may have been murdered by Leto and Thufir. And I think at the time I just said, I think that's a bit like the plot from Once Upon a Time in the West. And so almost immediately after going off air, after the last episode, I just sat and kicked myself and just go, "What is wrong with you, Russell?" That's the House of Atreides, basically. And I'm just, oh dear. So it was one of those kind of face palm moments for myself, and just thought I'd point it out that I think I'd said it was a bit like the plot from Once Upon a Time in the West, the Sergio Leone film. And of course, it's very much the Atreides themselves, isn't it? So just a bit of a face palm moment there. Babs is saying, "I'm cooking dinner but listening in." Excellent, Babs. This one shouldn't be too long tonight. This is one of the shortest chapters, I think, in the book. And we actually have one of the very long chapter coming up following that. Which is going to be a good one. This is quite an interesting wee chapter, but I'm hoping to get a bit of cooking done myself. Actually, Babs, I've got a loin of pork downstairs that I want to get on the slow cook, basically, and possibly do a stir fry or something like that with it later. I have it all set up for tomorrow. So, but yeah, a bit of cooking is nice, I have to say. But yeah, I'm glad it's nice to have good weather. It feels like spring here at last, really, and I'm quite pleased. And I was having a wee chat. I think I'd mentioned to you about my birthday the other week, and about getting a couple of book tokens, and I just thought I'd share with you. I had noticed that a couple of my books, I've lost a few books over the years, and I've been talking on the Science Fiction Fridays about my Philip K. Dick books, etc., and realised that Valis was missing. So I have Valis on the way. I've replaced a couple of old books with book tokens that I got for birthday presents, I suppose. So, but this is one of them. And as much as we talk about the Atreides and the relationship with the bull, I just thought I'd show you again. I'm replacing. This is a kind of a replacement of a copy of the Toynbee Cully. I lost my copy of this years ago. I had a translation by Thomas Kinsella, I think. And so I managed to pick up this, and it's absolutely beautiful Penguin Classic of the Toyn, and it's a new translation by Kieran Carson. And the cover is actually, just to tell you, the artist, to show it to you, is the Toyn copyright Rebecca Canavan is the artist here. But have a look at that. Isn't that beautiful? And what a really nice book. I'm really looking forward to reading. This is the Irish epic, to do with the war over a couple of bulls, I suppose. But this is all your stuff to do with Cuchulainn and so on. So I'm really looking forward to reading this. But the other thing, just in relation to Dune and a lot of stuff that we've been talking about with myth, excuse me, and I often point out kind of Robert Graves and Apollodorus, etc. But Graves is really good because he's kind of done all your homework for you, and he would be referring to people like this. But I picked up a copy of this in relation to. I'll just show it to you. It's Eratosthenes and Hyginus's Constellation Myths, and it also includes Aratus's Phenomena. So this is another really interesting little work on mythology. Of course, Eratosthenes' work doesn't really survive, but it's through Hyginus's notes on his stuff. So it's all to do with myths, to do with constellations. And particularly, I think there's a lot of this in Dune, and I thought it would be an interesting little. I've not actually owned a copy of this before, so I'm really looking forward to reading it and see if it'll give us a wee bit of insight into some of the stars and so on. Within the Dune universe and the myths that are attached to them. So really nice sort of lovely set of books there, I have to say. I'm waiting on the other two to arrive. I'm trying to remember what the other two were, but one of them was Valis. Oh yes, the other one was Ursula K. Le Guin's The Word for World is Forest, which I've not read before. So yeah, interesting bit of reading coming my way. And hopefully we can use some of it in relation to our look at Dune. So it was just before we got going on chapter 14, I really wanted to point out that this little discussion that Thufir and Leto have in relation to, do you think Jessica's an orphan? Maybe she actually does know her parentage. Do you think we killed her parents? This kind of thing. Is she out for long-term Greek revenge? And that little bit of a discussion there. There's something else in this chapter here, I suppose, as well. Before we get going, it's a very short, very tight little chapter, and it really is just I suppose it has a couple of purposes. It's a little bit of a mood setter, I think. It opens our eyes to Leto, and it lets us have a look at Leto through Paul's eyes. And if we're careful enough, I've often pointed this out, that as much as Herbert's pretty careful about how he goes about his business, Dune is a big trick on the reader in terms of how we look at the hero Paul, and particular in terms of how we look at Paul Atreides, we should look to his father. We're told to do so. Excuse me. But in this instance, this is one of the chapters where we get a hint of what the Atreides are like, and it's again, these things are subtle, and we move on throughout the story, and we don't really pay too much attention to them. But this chapter should, as I said, for those of us who's got to Dune Messiah and know what Paul Atreides gets up to, there's a bit of a clue here within the nature of the family, I suppose, and their character. And that's something else that we're going to have a chat about tonight, I suppose, is the ethical and moral nature of the Atreides. And we're also introduced in this chapter to Herbert's ideas on, I suppose, ethical versus natural law, which we'll have a bit of a natter about, and we'll even see if we can dig out Herbert's quote on that, if we can. So let's get cracking, shall we? And our epigraph here, first of all, there is probably no more terrible instant of enlightenment than the one in which you discover your father is a man with human flesh. And I suppose terrible instant, but the key word there is enlightenment. It's a point of understanding. It's an awakening to the humanity of your own father. And again, our epigraphs kind of give us a sense of what's coming. And this is another one, I suppose. This is from Collected Sayings of Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan. So what we're, in that sense, I suppose we could consider that this is something that Paul has said at some point, but it's slightly different in tone to the rest of the epigraphs that we've been presented with in regards to Leto. And it's not mentioning him. It's just a moment of discovery for children, I suppose, when they realize that your father is fallible, as a mortal man with flaws. So there we go. And we start off, and we're going. This is going to be morning of the second day of the Atreides on Arrakis, I suppose. We start off with Paul. The Duke said, "Paul, I'm doing a hateful thing, but I must." And almost immediately we'll get a little bit of mise en scene. We're going to get everything set up for us. And again, it's the conference room. We're reusing the same location. And we're told that there's a portable poison snooper, and that it's been brought in, and that they're having breakfast there. And this is the same room where Paul has basically slept overnight. And very interestingly, straight away, we're talking about poison a bit in this. I suppose there's a couple of things to point out. First of all, this hateful thing, we're going to have that repeated a couple of times. But the term, I think, the word that's most interesting from Leto's point of view, and maybe from our point of view in this chapter, maybe just to me, but the one that I've been really picking up on in this chapter is the word must. I must do these things. And it occurs quite a lot. And I just thought, I'm doing a hateful thing, but I must. And it's a bit of a vague statement, isn't it, as well? Oddly enough, this first little instance here, where we have this description of the table, where they're having breakfast, this poison snooper. We're told the thing's sensor arms hung limply over the table, reminding Paul of some weird insect that's newly dead. And I just thought that, there we go. That's sort of setting the tone for this chapter, I suppose. A sense of death, doom, and it's an odd kind of image, I suppose, but it's what this mechanical thing reminds him of, and it's possibly reminding him of the recent mechanical object that tried to take his life. So a thing that's also common in this chapter is where Leto's attention is directed, and I suppose in terms of he's not looking at Paul a lot, or he either turns away from Paul a fair bit. It seems to be difficult for him to look Paul in the face in this chapter, I think. And we're told his attention is directed out the windows at the landing field, and it's roiling of dust against the morning sky. And here we go, a little bit of just development of this. So we're getting, again, there's our time frame. We're into the morning now. And we're told that Paul has a viewer in front of him, and he's watching a short film clip, and the topic is Fremen religious practices. And it's been compiled by Howitt's men, who are experts. I often wonder what these could be quite interesting, couldn't they? Atreides propaganda films, know your Fremen religious practices. Kind of gives you that sense of those kind of, I imagine them to be kind of videos a bit like those, what's I'm thinking on things like Duck and Cover, stuff like that, Of course, we've heard these phrases before. This is Paul getting to understand this little movement in time, what the crowds have been shouting at him. So, of course, we've got Muad'Dib and Lisan al-Gaib, and we're told he closed his eyes and recalls the shouts of the crowd. So again, we're moving back there. This is his memory. So that is what they hope, he thought. And he remembered what the old Reverend Mother had said, Kwisatz Haderach. So we have those three terms here now. Muad'Dib, Lisan al-Gaib, Kwisatz Haderach, all at once. And we're told the memories touched his feelings of terrible purpose. So these are all these kind of phrases that are building up with Paul. The people are calling him the Muad'Dib, the Lisan al-Gaib. He's been told he may be the Kwisatz Haderach. He has his own sense of terrible purpose. We're getting all of these terms here. And I think this little description just on the end of this, I think is quite interesting. The memories touched his feelings of terrible purpose, shading this strange world with sensations of familiarity that he could not understand. And of course, as we go, the terrible purpose that Paul has, there is a moment where he'll define it for us, I suppose. And otherwise, it's this building sense of, I suppose, again, he describes it as sensations of familiarity, that there's something about this place that's just, it is familiar to him. It doesn't seem strange, and he can't understand why. And we get this repetition. Here we go. Here it is again. This hateful thing, whatever that means. A thing's a thing. And, the Duke repeating himself. And I think, again, we get this. This is the start of how Paul, I suppose, how we see Paul's behavior throughout this chapter. I think he's the more mature, grown up of the two, definitely. And there's a sense of vagueness and scattiness to Leto. He's tired, he's fatigued, and he seems distracted. Paul is kind of, I suppose, cuts through the nonsense a bit here. There's no, his questions initially are kind of, they're not, I suppose they're not particularly vague. It's just cut to the chase. What do you mean, sir? This kind of thing. And so I think it's just, his father's being vague, and I don't think he just cuts to the chase. And what do you mean, sir? And Leto looked down at his son. So this is the first time we have Leto looking at Paul. And we'll see throughout the chapter, he'll turn away constantly. Keep returning to the window, etc., etc. So Leto looked down at his son, because the Harkonnens want to trick me. And here we go. Now, the Harkonnens want to trick me by making me distrust your mother. They don't know that I'd sooner distrust myself. And again, Paul says, again, short statement, I don't understand, sir. And I thought this was particularly interesting. This little bit here. First of all, when Paul jumps in, what do you mean, sir? A hateful thing must be done. This cut to the chase. What do you want? The word "sir" there, and we're going to get it repeated with Paul to his father. And I kind of wondered about the tone of Paul here, and I thought that it's possible you could read it a few different ways. Maybe, what do you mean, sir? As in to his father. What do you mean, sir? As in to a military commander. And then the one that I kind of thought more like here was, what do you mean, sir? As in that kind of where you're being respectful to somebody, you're being curt, if you know what I mean. It's where whenever you're being aggressive, you start being overly polite, if you know what I mean. That kind of thing. Not aggressive in that sense, but I thought he was being a bit curt. Get to the point. And I suppose the first thing I wanted to mention is that because Leto says, because the Harkonnens want to trick me. And I think Leto's big problem is that I think there's a massive ego there at work. And simply put, this is another instance of him being wrong. As much as he explains about this, I think he talks about, in a second here, he'll explain about the note. Yeah. The thing is that he's got it wrong again. The sowing of the idea of Jessica being the traitor, it's not to really get to Leto. It's to mess with Thufir specifically. That is the particular of that part of the Harkonnen plot. It's to mess with Thufir Hawat, not with Leto. And once again, I suppose there is an egomania to this guy, almost in a sense that it's often always about him. And I think that's where he gets things wrong, and where he takes it upon himself to, no, he's right. The way he treats people when they kind of challenge what he believes is correct, if you see what I mean. It's a very much the Leto show, I think, in his own head. And this is just a wee example of it. The way he presents this information here. Where are we? And of course, The Harkonnens think to trick me by making me distrust your mother. It's not that simple. And once again, I think he's underestimated the Harkonnens, you know. Um, Again, he looks out the window, so turns away from Paul. And we're told that the white sun was well into the morning quadrant. So again, Herbert giving us a wee sense of time moving. The milky light picks out the boiling of dust clouds that spilled over into the blind canyons after fingering the shield wall. I'm starting to wonder, is that roiling and boiling is one of those a misprint in my edition? Because what did we have? I had the other week Peter de Vried, Vried instead of Peter de Vries in the edition I'm working through at the minute. So again, a little bit more setting up the scene outside, giving us an external locus for Paul, for Leto to stare out at. I suppose he's quite distracted here, isn't he? And rather than focus on chatting to Paul, he's back and forward to this window looking out, and we don't get a particularly hopeful, I suppose, picture. We talk about blind canyons. Again, this idea of Leto being blind, I suppose, that everything about him, or and to all the advice he gets. And there we go. So the other thing is, I suppose, that whenever he's saying making me distrust your mother, let me just find this wee bit here. I think as we go through this, I think it's clear that there is a level of, I don't know how to put it, but I think there is some level of distrust in Jessica from Leto. We'll get to it in a wee second, actually. Here we are. So we talked a wee bit about this slowly speaking in a low voice to contain his anger. We've mentioned his anger a few times and how it affects him. At this point now, his anger is contained inside him. Slowly speaking in a low voice, he explained to Paul about the mysterious note. So we don't need to hear all of that again. Herbert, another little, just moves the story on with this. And Paul, of course, says, you might as well mistrust me. And they have to think that they've succeeded. And here we go. We were pointing out this word must again as we go through this chapter. They must think me this much of a fool. It must look real. Even your mother may not know the sham. So emphasis again on must. It has to go this way. And the question Paul asked, but sir, again, why? And here we go. Your mother's response must not be an act. Must not be an act. Oh, she's capable of a supreme act. Okay. But too much rides on this. I hope to smoke out a traitor. She must be hurt this way, that she does not suffer greater hurt. And again, all of these musts, it must happen. This must be the case. Your mother must be hurt in this way so that she doesn't suffer greater hurt later. And this is Leto's thinking, I suppose. The point we were making, I suppose, in a wee bit earlier about does he trust Jessica? The whole of course I trust her. We're kind of told here that he doesn't actually. I think that the evidence is there. He says your mother's response must not be an act. Okay, so she's got to act as if nothing's wrong. Isn't she capable of doing that? Quite possibly more than anyone else here. More than likely. In fact, he tells us so. She's capable of not just minor acting, moderate acting, whatever. She's capable of a supreme act. Your mother can be a supreme actor, but too much rides in this. It's too important to try. And what does that mean? And that's kind of where it's that statement. She's capable, but too much rides on this. So I don't trust her to do it. Essentially, is what he's saying. It's too important. I'd rather deal with it myself. And I'm wondering sometimes how much is this a response? How much is this a gender attitude? within the, I suppose, the Pfeiffer-like system and everything that it pertains to within the Dune universe. So yeah, I don't know if you agree or not, but for me, simply put, he's saying he does trust her. I think that statement there shows that he doesn't. Not certainly not with anything really important. Um, and it seems a little bit paradoxical, I think. So he wants to, again, he's going to cause this harm to, I suppose, to smoke out a traitor. And we're told he must seem as if he's been completely cozened. And I suppose Paul's question and concern within this, Paul says, "Well, why tell me if you?" And I might give it away. And so Leto's response is, "Well, they're not going to be watching you the way they're going to be watching, for example, myself and Jessica." And I don't know. I think that Paul would be significantly within that sphere. That if people are watching Leto and Jessica, they're probably going to see Paul too. And I think it's interesting that he trusts Paul with the secret, and that Paul must act a certain way and not give it away. You'll keep the secret, he tells Paul. You have to do that. And I suppose there's a big but there with Jessica's capable of a supreme act, but what's your but? Basically, why do you not trust her with this? And if she is capable of such a supreme act, surely she is the person to trust with this. So once again, I think it's poor judgment on Leto's part. And as I said, excuse me, we do have a bit of knowledge about this. We know from the second chapter, we know that the Baron's plan has many little plans within it, and they're all to kind of set House Atreides on the off foot, if you like. But really, the whole sowing the seed of mistrust with Jessica is aimed to get at Thufir, and I think Thufir's been got at rightly already. If you see what I mean. I suppose that you kind of wonder, are the Harkonnens' plans towards Thufir necessary? It seems that if this is the thing to destabilize him, arguably he's kind of destabilized already. But it's again just part of their plans, I suppose. So again, Leto walks to the window and speaks without turning. The idea is this, I suppose: if anything happens to me, you can tell your mother the truth. Tell her that I never doubted her, not for an instant, this kind of thing. And I should want her to know this, and I've asked again, is this true? And I suppose the other thing that really kind of creeps into that matter is that what if something happened to Paul and Thufir as well? Then, and Jessica somehow survived, that she would go on actually believing that. So there's a possibility for Leto's deception here to potentially cause his great love great pain for the rest of her life if things don't go the way he thinks, And of course, we got this rather interesting bit here. Paul recognizes the death thoughts in his father's words. I suppose this has a bit of the Jungian and Freudian quality. I suppose that this idea it crops up a fair bit, I suppose, within Dune. Oh, I think there's tons of it later on, isn't there? The death thoughts in his father's words, and he spoke quickly. So I think this is essentially an attempt, and again, it shows you Paul's maturity here. But he speaks quickly, and I think this is to counteract his father's thoughts. Nothing's going to happen to you, sir. And of course, Leto cuts him off with our usual "be silent, son." That we hear quite a lot from certain characters. And I think it is interesting that we have certain characters who use this, that like to shut people up. And it doesn't happen very often, but it's often with the "be silent." It's a command, isn't it? And we get Paul staring back, as we often do whenever this kind of behavior, when someone tells someone to shut up in Dune, they tend to get stared at quite hard, don't they? And in this case, of course, Paul's looking at his father with Bene Gesserit trained eyes, I suppose. Mm. So rather than just react, he takes a moment to study his father, stared at his father's back. He can't see his face. Seeing the fatigue in the angle of the neck, the line of the shoulders, and the slow movements, figures out his father's tired, states so. You're just tired, father. You know, and again, I suppose this shows you Paul sizing up his father in a way here. The other thing I wanted to point out here is his dad just told him to shut up, and he doesn't. He quick analysis, quick observation of his father, uh, and then he actually responds back. He doesn't shut up. You're tired, father. Um, and again, the level of confidence with Paul, how Paul behaves in this chapter compared to his very tired father, um, is quite interesting, I think. But I just thought that he's not silent. He's mature in his response and his observation, and he speaks the truth to Leto after the observation. And we get this statement from the Duke and the emphasis, I am tired. The Duke agreed. And here, this is a very interesting little, as I said, it's a very small chapter, but there's quite a bit in it. I'm morally tired. And here we go. This section in particular, I think, the melancholy degeneration of the great houses has afflicted me at last. Perhaps. And we were such strong people once. And we have Paul responding to this in quick anger again, I suppose. Melancholy degeneration of the great houses afflicted me at last. And I've put really, laughing out loud. I think well, certainly if there is a moral degeneration of the houses, that Leto's probably been afflicted by it already. I made a few wee points about this. Just let me see. And that as well, that we were such strong people once. And I've made a couple of wee comments there just on this sort of. We'll get to the. I suppose we're going to talk about the degeneration of House Atreides. Paul spoke in quick anger. Our house hasn't degenerated, hasn't it? And I've made a couple of wee things here. I just thought that the idea that they were such strong people once, it's kind of like this idea of the lesser ages of man, if you see what I mean. I think it's an idea presented in mythology, I suppose. The golden age of heroes and this kind of thing. And the other thing I just thought, the idea that we're not what we were. This idea. We were, it's a common kind of thing. We were once great. In this sense, I thought both Leto reminded me a bit of Odysseus as portrayed as Ulysses by Alfred Lord Tennyson in the poem Ulysses. And I thought in that sense that maybe Paul was a little bit like Telemachus here. But the quote, if you want to know what I'm referring to, is and though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, it's this kind of rousing. It's that kind of moment in Ulysses where I think they all realize we're all old and we're not the people we used to be, but let's go out for one last hurrah, if you know what I mean. It's a great poem. Let me see. Not the novel. No, thank you. Tennyson. Let's see. Just to have a wee nosy at it here on the screen. I love the beginning and the end of this poem. I think the beginning is, just to read it to you, it little profits that an idle king by this still hearth among these barren crags, matched with an aged wife, I meet and dole unequal laws unto a savage race that hoard and sleep and feed and know not me. It's a great poem. For anyone who doesn't know it, check it. This is my son, mine own Telemachus, to whom I leave the scepter and the isle, this kind of thing. And the end of it, of course, but it's kind of, come on, one more. Where are we? This is the wee bit, I suppose. The long day wanes, the slow moon climbs, the deep moans round with many voices. Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. Push off, and sitting well in order smite the sounding furrows. For my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars until I die. It may be that the gulfs will wash us down. It may be we shall touch the happy isles and see the great Achilles, whom we knew. Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. There you go. Just a wee bit of that. I do like my Tennyson, I have to say. There's Joseph saying, I am here, but I am driving. Pit stop for a sausage roll. Excellent, Joseph. Watch out for those service station sausage rolls. Joseph saying hello. So we're just having a wee chat there. That I don't know. There's something of Leto, I suppose, in a more noble sense in this poem, but that little bit there reminds me a little bit of Ulysses. And the other part of this, I suppose, where we're talking about the moral decline, the degeneration of the houses, and Paul in quick anger, speaking quick, our house hasn't degenerated, hasn't it? And of course, that we've got the Atreides, in that sense, the house of Atreides and the Pelopids and all. We can look at that in terms of a house in a spiral of moral decline. And I also thought that this idea within these sort of stories at the time, reminiscent slightly. House Atreides maybe a little bit reminiscent of things like the House of Usher, but I was also thinking about the Groan family and Gormenghast, this kind of thing. These kind of old families in moral decline. The feature of the psychotic family novel. But of course, yeah, hasn't it degenerated? Leto's rhetorical question here. What's so great about House Atreides? And I have to say, we get a bit of a description of Leto at this point. He turns to face his son again. We can see these dark circles beneath his hard eyes, the cynical twist of the mouth. I often go whenever I see the word cynical, do they mean dog-like? I was wondering. And of course, we get this this little bit from him here, and it's self-pity a bit, isn't it? And it's self-recrimination. I should wed your mother, make her my duchess. And this is a kind of, here we go. It's another one of those but. Whenever we had Jessica earlier, Jessica's response must be real. She's capable of a supreme act, but and here we go again. I should wed your mother, should make her my duchess, yet. And here we go. What is it, Leto? My unwedded state gives some houses hope that they may yet ally with me. Through marriageable daughters. There you go. There's the ego at work again. And yeah, he's explaining to his son why he won't marry his mother, which I think is not going down particularly well. He shrugged, oh well. And again, we talk about how should we put it? Emotional intelligence. Is that it? That's what we're looking at. My wife told me that she married me because I had emotional intelligence. There we go. And I was quite pleased about that. I should have married your mother, son. But yeah, I'm just leaving the field open for other women to marry me. It's an appalling thing to say, even if there's a political reason for it. And I think once again, Paul's response to Leto here is flat. Probably, mother's explained it to me enough. I don't want. It's I've put Paul cuts him off, and there's no need for details. My only note here is he impressed by Leto? I don't think so. But the other thing I was asked, just in relation to what Leto was saying, is that I suppose it brings up an old question of why not marry Jessica, and that Leto's options, for example, that Paul could marry Irulan in terms of a political marriage, would achieve the same goals, that Leto could marry Irulan. There are plenty of options actually in terms of the way that they go on about this kind of thing. And I often thought that it had something to do with leaving a marriage open towards the throne, but Leto tells us it's not. It's about the other houses making alliances with his through marriage. And I think it seems convoluted sometimes, I think. Paradoxical, that's the word. There's D. Viller. Hi, D. I think that captures the weirdness of nobility, since that used to be well, yeah, they're pretty BSC, aren't they? I have to say. What's that? What's the really? Is it the very famous comedians joke? It's a joke that's told by lots of different comedians, but I think there's somebody who tells it particularly well. But I think it's called The Aristocrats. As far as I know, check that joke out. I think that's the weirdness of nobility personified. Yeah. It's bizarre here. I just thought there are definitely options here, and I still think it's a bit off. I think Paul's response is, "It's been explained to me. Mother's explained it to me. I don't need to hear it. Just really that's enough." And here we go again. Leto's thoughts, I think, are all over the place. I think he's focused on the peril. Focused. I'm saying he has a head on the peril that's coming. He's trying to figure out the whole logistics of running Arrakis, the attacks on his family, a sense of doom, and he really does seem to be, I suppose, a guy with his hand in too many pies, and he's struggling, I think. If you had an employee like Leto, you'd be reassigning some of his work, wouldn't you? That kind of thing, asking him to take a bit of a breather. We get this, I suppose, this statement from him: nothing wins more loyalty for a leader. It's almost a non sequitur, this one. Nothing wins more loyalty for a leader than an air of bravura. The Duke said, I therefore cultivate an air of bravura. And it just sounds like such a stupid thing to say. But in terms of what we're talking about, I suppose politically, I cultivate an air of bravura. What we're talking about here, is sophistication in the old sense of the word. I appear to be brave, have a sense about me. I cultivate this. And I've also made a wee note, like his father, with the bull. And if this bravura got his father killed, it's probably going to get him killed too. But it's all an act to a degree. And I suppose, what does that mean, really, in terms of Leto's personality? But he cultivates it. It's something he works on. And the language he uses there is almost a little bit flowery in that sense. But the idea within education, I suppose, is that you can have someone who's educated and someone who's sophisticated, and they're not the same thing. The person who's educated in this sense is Paul, who has been taught what the subjects that he knows, the theories that he knows, and he knows them. He's studied. The sophisticated person is a person who's prompted to speak a certain way, to talk a certain way, that it appears that they are knowledgeable in their subject. If you see what I mean, it's all about appearances. It's why that, I suppose, the word sophistication, word like sophistry is kind of any argument whose intent is to deceive. There's something deceptive always about sophistication. It goes back to these, I suppose, these different schools within Athens and back in the day. And some of our famous philosophers not too fond on sophistry. I suppose Aristotle be one, but effectively, he is one in a sense, I suppose, when he takes on the job of working as Alexander the Great's tutor. There we go. Sorry, I'm off on one. I'll come back to the book here. But Paul's assurances here, Toledo, again, straightforward, factual, possibly a bit naive. You lead well, you govern well, men follow you willingly and love you. And I'm actually wondering at this point, I haven't written this down, but I should have. Does Paul believe this? Or is he telling his father what he needs to hear? But Paul's statements to his father, they're not emotionally loaded. They're clear, concise, and again, he's trying to reassure his father. It really should be the other way around here. But I'm wondering, does Paul believe this? That the people love you so that all the people love us rich nobles. Um, and we take all their stuff from them every year, and our entire wealth's based on taxing them. And yeah, we're going to find a wee bit of this out, I suppose. But this brings up the subject, of course, of Leto's propaganda core. And we've talked a fair bit about this up until this point, but we haven't seen too much of it in action. Not that we're seeing too much of it here, but we are simply told, after Paul saying they love you, my propaganda core is one of the finest, says the Duke. And there's something quite funny about that they do love me because they've been told to love me, I think, essentially. And that's what that's about. And I'm wondering, just at this point, does Paul realize that it is how much of it is propaganda? How much do the people really love Leto Atreides? I wonder how much the survivors would love him after the Arrakis affair, I suppose. Once again, he turns out to stare at the basin. And there's greater possibilities on Arrakis than the Imperium could ever suspect. Of course, I've written down, well, what are they? And really, it is just wealth and power. Fundamentally, that's it. If you want to add in a military force in the Fremen, but that's power. Power comes from the army in this sense. Now, off he goes, and we get, sometimes I think that we've been better off if we'd run, if we'd gone renegade, or we could sink back into anonymity among the people and be less exposed to. And again, Paul's father cuts him off. Big exclamation mark. It's an awful lot of self-pity, I think. But the other thing about this, I suppose, and I don't know what you think, guys, is that really this is kind of been the plan B, or really it's kind of been the plan A for everyone else, isn't it? He's been advised before. He's been told and he's been warned by several groups, and this is the option. This is the one this is what Jessica wants. Ultimately, it's what he should do. And if he'd had a bit of sense about this, he's walking into a death trap, and he's not going to walk out. And I think we're getting a moment of realization, as much as we have this chapter beginning with the epigraph. There is probably no more terrible instant of enlightenment, and Paul's having that here. But there's probably, I think, matching that in this chapter, a real moment of realization that from Leto himself, that he's messed up. And I think he's moving to plan B, plan C, possibly, whatever this is. But there's a certainly amount of self-pity here. And again, we have this repetition of this thing. Yes, I am tired. Excuse me. And again, the mind jumps off. Non sequitur, suddenly another change of subject. Did you know? We're using spice residue as raw material and already have our own factory to manufacture film base. So it's not a complete jump, I suppose. Something that we can use spice for, but it's to do with this propaganda core. Making movies, celluloid, basically, I suppose. How do we look in the back of the book for what is film base? But there's not an entry in the terminology of the Imperium. So I'm assuming it's just something like celluloid for making films, that kind of thing. Almost this kind of jump is almost a distraction. It distracts Paul from his father's behavior. Sir, you get a little bit of a shift in the conversation, and again, some more stuff from Leto on propaganda. We mustn't run short of film base, or else. And here we go. Well, this is one of them. I suppose we've got a couple of pretty heavy things. How can we flood village and city with our information? The people must learn. How well I govern them. Even if they've never heard of me. and they've got to know how well they must learn how well I govern them. And how would they know if we didn't tell them? Now, that is dictatorship, really. It is dictation, if you want to take the word to its fundamental meaning, I suppose, and authority. But we're going to tell them that we're the good guys, and that they're going to learn how well I govern them, and they're probably going to learn to love me as well. And just propaganda. And he tells, again, dismissive of Paul, I suppose, in this, get some rest. And again, he looks at Paul. So again, we've had this constant turning to face Paul, looking away, looking out the window, turning to face Paul again. Again, he had turned away again. But there's that point where he's telling Paul to be silent, wasn't it? And he's back again, facing his son. And here we get this lesson from Leto. And it's an interesting enough one, I suppose. We're going to have a wee chat about it. Arrakis has another advantage. The spice is in everything here. So you breathe it and eat it in almost everything. What is this advantage? Here it is. This imparts certain natural immunity to some of the most common poisons from the Assassin's Handbook. So there we go. We've been talking about flagging the different properties of melange as we go through the book. This is one of them. It acts as I suppose it acts like it gives the user who's breathing and eating in melange all the time a natural immunity to the bulk of the common poisons in the Assassin's Handbook. So immunity to most poisons would be a property, I suppose, of chronic spice use. We're getting this Assassin's Handbook brought up here as well. So this is one that is in the terminology of the Imperium. So if we jump back there, it'll tell us that this is a 3rd century compilation of poisons commonly used in a war of assassins. And we've had a wee look at that before. The book is later expanded and includes those devices permitted under the Guild Peace and the Great Convention. So it's another one of those little things. Here's, that refers to an actual book that's known within the Dune universe. These kind of things give the novel itself a sense of verisimilitude, a sense of history as well. Though they don't tell us what 3rd century, I think, in the Imperium, in the terminology of the Imperium, they don't tell us if it's the 3rd century before the Guild, the 3rd century after the Guild, or even the 3rd century AD or BC or something like that. This ancient book of the Assassin's Handbook, an ancient book of poisons, which sounds quite cool. And so this is going to be quite interesting in a minute. The other point that he makes here. So simply put, one of the advantages, being poisoned is a big problem for these houses, I suppose. One of the big advantages about living here is that it takes a major sting out of that threat. But he goes on to say that we need to watch watch every single drop of water means that all food production is carefully monitored under the strictest of surveillance. And we get a little bit of info from Frank on this kind of stuff. We're talking about yeast culture, hydroponics, and chemovit, which I'm assuming is some sort of chemical vitamin type processing plant or something like that. Because of this, here we go. We cannot kill off large segments of our population with poison. And we cannot be attacked this way either. Arrakis makes us moral and ethical. Now, yeah, I don't know. You could ask, I've written the horror. The question is Leto prepared to poison a large, or would he have been anywhere else? Has he done it before? Why this tactic? Would Leto be prepared to poison a large segment of the population is what we're talking about. I've written yes, I think so. And yeah, just to hear that. So that is, and we cannot kill off large segments of our population with poison. and we cannot be attacked this way either. In other words, the properties of melange, the inference there, I suppose, is that the properties of melange mean that we can't poison the population, you know, in large quantities. It's a very interesting idea. And I don't know if it's just the way it's been presented, or is he playing devil's advocate or not. But I certainly, in my own opinion of Leto, yeah, little people don't really matter in Dune. I think he would do it. So I just thought that's quite horrific. That's pretty evil. And the point of it is, yeah, it would be an evil act in terms of morality. Now, if we discuss the next wee bit, to poison the population, it also means it can't be done to us. By the way, that yeah, happy days, but we can't do it to them. I think he goes there first. So Arrakis makes us moral and ethical, and this is going to be a thing to do with Dune, what we call the moral, Herbert's idea of the moral and ethical law. Let me see if I can find a little quotation about it from Frank, first of all. Do 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 do. Here we go. For those who are checking out my videos, this would be in the second video on the ecology section. This is Frank's discussion on this. I'll just read you the whole thing, give us a bit of context. So we play the game today. Let me just check I'm not missing any of this. Sorry. Oh, no, there we go. Just for the context of this, well, this is to do with violence. It was to do with violence, I suppose. Violence, in one sense, is key. Is in one sense key to understanding Herbert's approach to ecology in the Dune universe, believing as he did that force was the key tool of Western man in dealing with any given problem, and especially in the general terms of his approach to living and interacting with his environment. So this is Herbert's quotation. This is Herbert talking himself here. We play the game today with counters called money, and we talk about laws of supply and demand and so on. There is a law of supply and demand, and there is no problem which won't submit to this approach, even the problem of our own ignorance. This assumption, you see, throws it out the window right there, because it is an asinine assumption and the basic fallacy of Western man's approach to living. Now, I'm not saying that we should immediately drop this and adopt a Vedanta way of thinking. We need what I would call a science of wisdom. The moral norm, as I tried to show in Dune, is something imposed upon people by their environment. Ethical law takes a step in another direction, and it says that I, the thinking animal, see the logical consequences of these moral actions, and maybe I'd better modify the moral law slightly by a higher ethical law. Dune shows the conflict between absolutes and the necessity of the moment. You might say it is an exercise in showing up the fallacy of absolutism. There we go, folks. That's Frank's words on that. It's something that we've been pointing out, by the way, as we've been going. I myself don't like absolutes, but anytime we find them within the philosophy or logic of characters within Dune, we've been pointing them out. Because I usually think if you've gone to an absolute, you're done with your argument. You're not going to win. But there you go. So that's quite interesting. From my own point of view, I find this what Herbert's talking about from a moral norm, whatever that is, as opposed to ethical law. Now, I'd argue that being ethical and being moral are synonyms, and that he's used a tautology here. To be honest with you, if we're dealing about the ethos of a person, more in the sense of their own character. But what are your ethics? They're your sense of right and wrong. Really, what are your morals? They're also your sense of right and wrong. So I think that the difference in what Herbert's talking about, really, the words are interchangeable. He talks about a moral norm and ethical law. Why not an ethical norm and moral law? I suppose I think the word there that's quite important is law. I suppose it requires a human element. It requires either the spoken or written word. I don't know. I find his own statement there to be paradoxical. Um, and I think he maybe meant something else, to be honest with you. Uh, and I'm trying to figure out what did he mean there. Um, hmm. So, but this is what Leto points out. Arrakis makes as moral and ethical. I would say that that's a tautology. They're the same thing. Um, and the interesting point for me, I suppose, is that the planet, from Leto's point of view, forces him to change his behavior. I can't poison everyone here because of the spice being and everything. It makes them immune to poisons. And he silences Paul again at this point. I have to say, I'd like to know, by the way, what you guys think about this, the idea of this moral and ethical law. We're going to encounter it a fair bit more in relation to the ecology of Dune, and I think we're going to encounter it with Leah Kynes. And I think particularly we'll get Herbert's lesson on it, if I'm not mistaken, in the banquet scene, which is a really, really important scene in the book. I have to say, I'm looking forward to getting to the banquet scene. Taking it apart, that's going to be really intriguing. He says basically to Paul, I have to kind of say these things to somebody, almost as if he's venting on Paul, and looks away again. And as he looks out, he sees the dry landscape. We're told that the flowers that were there previously have now been trampled by the dew collectors, and they've now wilted under the early sun. Again, the dead flowers under the wilted dear, sounds like a poem of desolation or something like that, doesn't it? Again, more sort of death thoughts. I've made a wee note here, and he tells us that on Caladan we ruled by air and sea power, possibly poisoning, and on Arrakis we must scrabble for desert power. And basically, and again, this little bit here, I think quite interesting. This is your inheritance. This is your inheritance, Paul. I think Paul, what must be Paul thinking about that? Here you go, son. I leave all of this trouble and potential death and doom and wealth to you. This planet is yours, in a sense, is what he's saying. Here you go, Sonny. And as you're pointing out about the nobility and so on, but yeah, what will become of you if something happens to me? Well, I'm sure I'll be fine, Dad. I've got my own planet and an awful lot of people to tax. I don't know. It's not quite that simple, is it? I suppose, but you'll not become a renegade house. He said, no, that's not going to happen. You will become a guerrilla house, running, hunted. Congratulations, here's your inheritance. What an appalling thing to say to your child. I actually remember thinking it was reminiscent of, it reminded me a bit of Watership Down for some reason. The whole, you will be hunted, you will be, that kind of thing, that the rabbits. Which is quite an impressive speech. I wish I could remember it. Let me get to some of your comments, folks. I've been gabbing for a while. Cynthia says, still thinking about this, but I see the limits to using poison as a contrast to the seemingly endlessness of propaganda. Spice produces endless film base, but limits other types of power over others. Maybe legal versus moral. Yeah, but again, that's what I was. Yeah, I think that's possibly what he meant, and I don't know why, but for example, within how when we teach sort of rhetoric and how to make, I suppose, what we call is it the sympathetic argument. We have God, hang on, dialectic. What would you call it? I suppose ethos, logos, and pathos. Really, ethos in that sense, regardless, if you're the author of this kind of thing, you make books, films, speak publicly, is the ethical character of the person talking, really. And that would only be that's that sense of the word ethos. If we go into ethical in modern English, ethical and moral are synonyms. And so there is something confusing and paradoxical about it. And from my own point of view, just understanding the word. So yeah, I think it's that sense that there's a sense of natural justice, if you like, and then the legal. We've certainly seen that legal means nothing to Leto. The law is simply well, the law says that here, do this, break these people, shoot them, take it, sign it, makes it look legal. He's a criminal who just the law, almost in a sense, I think, is sign this as an excuse, um, which is, I suppose, a bit like in terms of royalty. If you think about it, here's a piece of paper from God says I'm your king. There you go. I wrote it, by the way. That kind of thing. But yeah, I'm tending to agree with you, D. Viller. Maybe legal versus moral. But the whole moral. And he doesn't use the same term as a moral norm, ethical law. But I think in that little quotation that we were talking about there. Let me just see if I can find that again. Let me have a wee look. Let's put that ethical law. Ethic. Something's happened here. Yeah, moral norm, ethical law. No, no. Sorry. Yeah, I think ethical law takes a step in another direction. Says that I, the thinking animal, see the logical consequences of these moral actions, and maybe I better modify the law slightly by a higher ethical law. Conflict between absolutes and the necessary of the moment. So he uses the term ethical law and the term moral law. I think he's trying to create some sort of separation there. Let me see. Is there anything else? Is that all the examples of? As Paul becomes accustomed, there's another wee part just within my own PhD. As Paul becomes accustomed to Fremen life later, he realizes that he is being immersed in a culture that is harsh yet fully integrated into the ecology of Arrakis. What Herbert referred to as the ideas inflicted upon a society by their environment and their moral and ethical laws it creates. The quote here is, it came to him that he was surrounded by a way of life that could only be understood by postulating an ecology of ideas and values. He felt that this Fremen world was fishing for him, trying to snare him in many ways. So it is an interesting. It is interesting, I have to say, and I'm hoping we can tease the meaning out of it as we go. Yeah. So they're saying, also, I wonder if we should go back to Leto saying that he was morally tired. Yes, perhaps only the morally tired need a moral crutch of poison limits, but morally robust would not be concerned. It almost sort of, I'm morally tired. Tired of having to do the right thing, tired of having to do, tired of my sense of right and wrong. Because the fact that, going back to that, I'm morally tired, and we get this repetition of being tired and what it means. And he's had people, since we've been on Arrakis, he's had people killed. He's discussing poisoning whole segments of his population. That's mass murder. Simply put. And so, that's the way I would look at it. Because Paul's silent when he brings all this up. You're going to become a guerrilla house. You're going to have to fight for the rest of your life, not a renegade house. Why not? Why couldn't he get out of here? And Leto, I suppose Paul's silence here, this is the bit, he's never seen his father this despondent. And again, this backing up to the epigraph, I suppose, the moment he realizes his father's just flesh and blood. Leto goes on then, he says, what do you need to do to hold, in order to hold Arrakis? It really does, he really just does not come across as a happy bunny here. Here's what he says. One is faced with decisions that may cost one his self-respect, integrity, this kind of thing. And again, out this window that we've kept bouncing back and forward to, He pointed out the window to the Atreides green and black banner hanging limply from a staff at the edge of the landing field. Hanging limply, it's like impotent. That honourable banner, that's another one of those words, could come to mean many evil things. Poisoning a large segment of your population is certainly an evil thing. And as I said, there's also we were talking about the. Is it possible that we might have killed Jessica's parents and that she actually, this conversation is there in the background from the previous chapter. Are these taking people's property, forging documents. So he's forgery, tax evasion, murder, and he's actually, I suppose, this is conspiracy to commit mass murder. He's not a nice man. Not by my assumptions, anyway. I would just not. My assumptions, that's the wrong word. Not by my standards, definitely. It could come to mean many things. We're going to see that, I suppose, later on with Paul's visions of the Atreides banner, under him. But interestingly, this bit, I suppose, isn't it? Let me see. Paul swallowed dry throat, no moisture in his throat. And wasn't that much? Here we go. I may be jumping on ahead. Possibly about the bit where his father took a tablet. Yeah, I am jumping on ahead. Hang on a wee second. And again, he's getting the sense of his father. Where are we? 30. Paul swallowed in a dry throat. His father's words carried futility, a sense of fatalism that left the boy with an empty feeling in his chest. And just as much as there's an empty feeling in his chest, I wonder how does Paul really feel here? And it's quite possible, that the epigraph at the start is from the collected sayings of Muad'Dib, that those are his words. This is a terrible instant of enlightenment for Paul Atreides. And of course, it's going to spur that sense of terrible purpose. It's almost as if the idea, you could almost do a taking over here, Paul. His father takes an anti-fatigue drug. Everybody's drugged up on Arrakis, aren't they? And gulps it dry. Again, no water. So we have this dry throat with Paul. The importance of moisture within this word and how it's used symbolically, I suppose. And it's also its preciousness, if you like, its rarity. Leto takes an anti-fatigue drug and gulps it dry. No drink. And this tired man, power and fear. Again, he's all over the place, but here we go. Power and fear. The tools of statecraft. I must order new emphasis on guerrilla training for you. And then we get this film clip again. We go back to these phrases that Paul was watching. They call you Mahdi, Lisan al-Ghib. As a last resort, you might capitalize on that. Capitalize. Dear. So, in other words, be their Messiah if you need to. Use them. And again, get this just Paul stared. Here we go. Oh, I always like to point out these stares. Paul just stared at his father. And again, it's the shoulders and back from previous times. Watching the shoulders straighten as the tablet did its work. The drugs are working. But remembering the words of fear and doubt. So Leto's talking about power and fear. These are the tools of statecraft, but he sees his father fearful and doubtful. And the chapter ends with another kind of non sequitur. We've been jumping all over these places, and I suppose that reflects Leto's state of mind. What's keeping that ecologist? Thuther was to have him here early. And that's the end of this rather short chapter, but there's quite a bit in it, isn't there? And it really, in terms of Leto's mood, I think we see a major decline in the man, and whether that's his tiredness. We must have spelt something here. Hang on a second. Whether it's his, tiredness, the nervous energy, the whole stress of the thing, I mean, moving house is never easy. As much as you talk about sometimes that, I think is it Marie Noel Zender talks about the nature of Dune as as a psychotic family novel. It's maybe actually who am I thinking on? Didier Anzu possibly. Goodness gracious, something's been spilled over me diary. That's not too bad. There we go. Oh, it's very soggy though. I'll have to stick that on a radiator. I'll just put that over there. There we go. But yeah, there's a few things, and as I said, I've always said this, guys. There are clues to Paul Atreides' character for those of us who will get to Dune Messiah and go, "Wow, I didn't see that coming." There are clues. And I think this is one, because in all things about Paul, we should look to his father. And the idea of what the Atreides get up to here, I think is quite. I think they're a very, typical nobles. I think, and I really do get the sense that as you go along, I'm sure Leto's a nice guy within his own family circle, etc. But I get the sense that he's an egomaniac. I think he's dismissive of other people, and I think he's especially dismissive of women. And I don't know how much of that is a cultural norm or just down to his character, but certainly Thufir behaves in a similar way. Pardon me. Let's just have a wee look at your comments here, folks. I'll catch up. Let's see. Devo says, but the things Leto does in Arrakis are all those things that Empire's great powers do. It's just what feudal powers do, the good and the bad one. Well, yeah, I suppose you're saying, what are the tools of statecraft? If you want to break it down to it, you kind of actually wonder why, war is a tool of war is what they say? War is an extension of politics by any or all means. We train killers within our society to fight wars. Empires is about, I suppose, in one sense, spreading one culture out and radiating all the wealth in. And yeah, I'd argue that there aren't really any good ones in that sense, but it's a question on how you look at civilization and how you look at what civilizations are and how they develop. But a wee joke that I like to make, just to amuse myself, as I like to say that civilization is the ultimate barbarity in some ways. But yeah, well, absolutely. Leto does the things that Empire's great powers do. Yeah, in the sense he's a feudal lord, and pretty much he will rule by might. He's shrewd enough to rule by propaganda. I think the probably the Harkonnens are a bit more brute force, but the Harkonnens also pay people, But simply put, at this point, at the end of this chapter, I've kind of asked myself a couple of questions. How does Paul view his father Leto now? It really is kind of. But before we move on, that's, I think, a very important question to ask. I've also put down that basically on the list of the Atreides not being nice, that we've got the potential of en masse poisoning, the use of power, fear, air power, sea power, mass murders being discussed. In the previous chapter, there was a quick run over of, is there a possibility we may have killed the mother of my son's parents sometime, old friend? is an incredible conversation to have with anybody. And I just also thought that why does Leto? The other question I'm asking myself is, why does Leto consider the Atreides moral? If this is maybe their moral degeneracy, if you like. Does he actually believe his own propaganda? And I actually think that he does. Leto the good, Leto the just. And especially when we get on later in the books and we understand that almost every group within the Dune universe puts out this kind of propaganda, and not all of it positive. A lot of them deliberately put out negative propaganda about themselves to make their opponents underestimate them or think that they're a particular thing, But yeah, it's a very feudal universe. As I said, we always have to remember this, that as much as this is a far future science fiction novel. We're in a society that has retarded atavism because of the Butlerian jihad, is feudal in nature, has a caste system, and it certainly seems that that within that we get a fair bit of variation, I suppose. But it seems that everyone has their place, and we'll never really see too many of the little folk, if you like, within the Dune series, and that's kind of a point, I suppose. We should always consider the victims of all of these houses, these noble people, because at the end, whenever we get to, not at the end, sorry, but at the point where we're in Dune Messiah, we're being presented, and as particularly Paul says this to Stilgar, about the number of people he's killed. They're statistics, just statistics. They're just numbers. This kind of thing, Leto's assumption that spice, Cynthia says, Leto's assumption that spice affords immunity against many forms of poison shows overconfidence or flawed thinking, since he, Jessica, and Paul will be drugged when Yui attacks. No immunity there. Very good point, Cynthia. And of course, it's one of those ones where, I have discovered something. It gives you an immunity to most, and we hear that word must a lot, but I just thought just most of the poisons in the Assassin's Handbook, not all of them. And this is I think, isn't this the Leto's discovery? I have determined this. It impacts a certain natural immunity to some of the most common poisons from the Assassin's Handbook. So it's not a reason to get rid of your poison snooper, is it? And you're absolutely right. Everybody gets drugged. But I suppose that they're probably prescription drugs, aren't they? Oh dear. This is a Hobbesian realist world, realist in the IR theory meaning. There's but there is also, I always like to point this out, D, that there is something, and I've got to dig this quote up because I keep bringing it up, that there's the other thing that really does run within Dune is an element of what Frank liked, I think he called it high camp. I wonder if I can find that quote for you now. Let me see. Hang on. I think it's an interesting term, actually, to talk about science fiction books, but quite a lot of science fiction books can be a bit campy. Oh, no, hang on. Nope, not in that document anyway. There we go. I must have a wee nosy. It must be it's an interview with Frank talking about the sensibilities of the Dune universe, I suppose, and how the different things. But it's that I suppose that he wants that sense of Byzantine intrigue and all of these things. But he says there's something to do with a bit of camp, and I must look it up. I really do. I really must get round to finding it. I don't know where it would be. I think it's in a magazine or something, so I'll probably have to dig a few of them out and read through them. But it's there is you're right. There's a realism to this world. These characters live in this world, and if that's just the way it is, is that the way it is? Do you have to live like this? The answer is no. This is the world of the Imperium, if you like. But you can get out. There is a way out. And there is a place where isn't it Chupat? Let me see. So the bottom line is, do you have to live like this? I don't know. The whole idea of poisoning the entire what am I looking for here? The idea of poisoning the whole population, I think, is quite interesting. A lot of the population. There's a really good Judge Dredd story, and it's about a citizen who's a bit of a snob. And he's supposed to be moving into this rich apartment block, but whatever way the lottery works with the apartments, he ends up in this really bad, run-down, crime-infested block with all these kind of rough and tumble types that he's just totally above. And he gets mugged a lot every day outside his apartment and stuff. And he just decides one day to put some gas through the whole air ventilation systems. He's that kind of guy. and basically tranquilize everybody in the block, so they stop beating him up and stuff like that. And he ends up becoming a mass murderer. He kills an awful lot of people in the block, and the judges turn up to arrest him, etc. And it's one of those kind of endings where the guy goes, I don't understand, Judge. I didn't put in sufficient dose of this knockout gas to kill anybody. I don't know what happened. And of course, the judges are letting him know that the nature of these residents of this block, they were highly aggressive in the first place, and that they've been pumping in their own tranquilizing gas for quite some time, which this guy didn't know about. So it's the combination of the judge's gas that keeps everyone tranquil, and this guy's gas that ends up killing everyone. I thought it was quite funny. But yeah, it definitely, this is the world you live in. But we get stuff from like the Fremen. It is said that Duke Leto rules with the consent of his people. We must wonder, is that propaganda? And do they rule with the consent of their people? How is this one man and his son ruling an entire planet called Caladan, and sort of, that their ducal name, their Atreides name, is actually a direct link to a Greek royal family, if you like, from ancient Earth. I don't. There's lots of questions to be asked about it. Chupad. That was it. I think I was going to look up very quickly. So there are renegade houses. There are houses that run from the stifling order of the Empire. It is one of these kind of, as we said, Dune is a kind of order to chaos perspective. Is it Chupad? Let me just see. As I recall, we haven't reached it. Bear with me a second, folks. Chupad. There we go. So-called sanctuary planet, probably several planets, for defeated houses of the Imperium, location or locations known only to the Guild and maintained inviolate under the Guild peace. So there are places that if you want to get out and don't want to have to do this, you don't have to. You can run. And arguably, I suppose, if the place is secret, if Leto did run and take the wealth of House Atreides with them, I suppose, and so whatever they had, and start afresh, the Harkonnens wouldn't be able to find them according to that, and neither would the Emperor. So there is a way out. And what was it they say? You get more flies with honey than vinegar. Poisoning a large amount of your population is an extreme, isn't it? Well, did somebody say there it's easier than keep making the propaganda? Oh, dear. Interesting how something says. Interesting how dismissive Leto is regarding the film clip of the religion on Arrakis. He sees it as a last resort, an afterthought, whereas Paul sees how personal it is, how deeply terrifying and tempting. Yeah, the sense that I got from it, Cynthia, at the start there, when Paul's not happy about that at all, is he? He's deeply disturbed by it. Where are we? Just jump back a wee bit here. But Paul's disturbed by the references to himself. I actually got the sense, Cynthia, that Leto's a bit gutted they're not talking about him that way. He should be their Messiah. And again, it's that sense of ego. I do get the sense whenever we look at a lot of the aspects of the trouble for the Atreides, that Leto always focuses on himself as the center sites, if you like, of whatever's going on. And an example of that there, I suppose, is that the Harkonnens want to trick me with this idea, and it's not about him at all. But he thinks it's about, they're making me distrust my. It's all about tricking Thufir. So we do get these kind of we do have this kind of, from our viewpoint as the reader, we can see the kind of mistakes that he's making. If as much as we're told, he's great, the epigraphs kind of start really praising, and then they less and less, so becoming sort of vague, I think, to a point. But I certainly wouldn't look at him as a moral person, and or ethical. or and as we were pointing out, or legal at this point. Um, yeah, very much kind of as you're pointing out there, this kind of Hobbesian realist world, this like a feudal baron living, ruling by might. Very much a kind of medieval robber baron. Is as I don't know, he's not a baron, he's a duke, but that sense, if you know what I mean, that's what I get from him. And I suppose there's more of a modern take to them, but there's little clues, and that I still, I still think the conversation in the previous chapter with the discussion of what if Jessica is an orphan and actually knows who her parents are, and we might have killed them? Is that a possibility? And it seems like of all the things that they could have picked, I wonder if that's where they went. It's very of a House of Atreides kind of thing, as I said, and yeah. Uh, I think I was wondering about he's dismiss he's his mind is adrift, and I'm always wondering, was in your comment there's something, is he dismissive because it's not about him? Um, I get a real sense of his ego in this chapter, and his despair. He's on it. He's outmaneuvered, he's outmatched, he's outthought, and almost all of these things are for his own faults. He underestimates. He completely underestimates the Harkonnen to the point where he thinks they're provincial and stupid, and that their plots are stupid and simple. And he's condescending, and he's quite rude. As we said, seems to have very little emotional intelligence. Even I suppose how we put it, even his physical interactions with his family are distant and awkward, and hello dear, this kind of thing. And the, there's something almost emotionally stunted about Leto, I think. The way he's presented in the book. Again, it's one of those things that just depends on how much attention we pay to the details. But I get the sense that as much as that this is this world, this is one of these houses fighting in a this rather Machiavellian war of assassins, this kind of thing, murder and poison and all of that. And all of that tension, and it seems that if that's the standard of the universe, it's finally got to him. He's been put into a corner. One of the epigraphs in that sense is the one that was attempting to kind of the very propaganda-ish one previously. Let me see. No, let's go back a couple of chapters. Let me just check. Goodness, we got a lot of notes here. No, it's not that one. Must be going back. There was one in particular I was thinking of. Yeah, the one. It is said, that Duke Leto blinded himself to the perils of Arrakis. The word "blind" is used a lot with him, isn't it? Blinded. That he walked heedlessly into the pit, heedlessly, not listening to other people, pretty much. And then you get this propaganda bit within it. Would it be more likely to suggest, how suggestive, that he'd lived so long? This is what it is suggesting. Sorry, this would have been the epigraph to chapter 11. I think it begins, it is said. Would it be more likely to suggest that he had lived so long in the presence of extreme danger that he misjudged its intensity? And at the time, we'd sort of made a wee comment. Yeah, that's fair enough. It's quite possible. It goes on to describe, maybe does he do this deliberately to sacrifice himself so his son might find a better life? I think the answer to that now obviously is we said no back then, it's very clearly no. And all evidence indicates the Duke was a man not easily hoodwinked. Back in chapter 11, we went, does it? So actually, it's the contrary. Evidence does show that he's easily hoodwinked. But I think it's because of his own prejudices, to be honest with you, and his own sense of ego and the personality that there must be something ultimately schizophrenic about Leto in that sense. if that there's a real person, there's a real Leto, and then there's this appearance that he's always trying to cultivate, and it seems to be that level of sophistication. He must cultivate different appearances for different people, and I would say it wouldn't do much for your own personality, and it would almost maybe make it fragmented. But he certainly comes across here as distracted, fragmented, a whole bunch of non sequiturs, things that aren't following, almost to the point where he's confusing Paul. And I think Paul just staring, really just taking in his father in this chapter. It is a very short chapter, but believe it or not, we got a heck of a lot of notes out of it. And just an awful lot to the nature of what I suppose, what the Atreides banner will come to mean. Many evil things. Not a balance of good and bad, or this kind of thing. There's a real sense of foreshadowing, sense of doom, and again, part the words that we get in here: fear, doubt, futility, fatalism. And even within that, the imagery, Paul's dry throat, this kind of thing, the desert, all the flowers dead because they've been trampled by the dew collectors to get the moisture from them. Which seems a bit bizarre, doesn't it? They can be a bit more careful with them. But a lot of it, again, and we had this imagery just before this of what we had: the shawl, the scythes, a lot of death and doom imagery, I suppose. So it's not getting better. It seems to be progressively getting worse. And the next chapter will sort of lift our heads a wee bit from this, I think. But there's Cynthia saying, agreed regarding Leto's ongoing focus on himself. Hadn't thought about him being jealous regarding the religious imagery seemingly linked to Paul. Good point. Yeah, I genuinely, because it is often about him, and I think that's a pretty interesting thing, isn't it? They're talking about my son that way, and he is. Yeah, that's about Paul. Oh, it's almost that. Could I be their Messiah? And it's almost as if he was their Lisan al-Gaib and the Mahdi, that he would have an absolute yay for his propaganda corps, wouldn't he? He'd be Duke Leto, the Mahdi, Atreides. I think he'd run with it totally, and I think there's something disappointing. He is disappointed, and he's despondent, and he's as Paul says, he's never seen his father this despondent. But it's one of those things where the people are going, "Yay, it's his son," and he really does have a sense of himself here. And he ultimately, I suppose, he's a person who trusts their own judgment over everyone else, but he's wrong to do so. He doesn't have the chops, and I suppose ultimately you can look at him as half military commander, half manager. I suppose half. I don't know. He runs a household, but it's hard sometimes to get a sense of how the planets work with the various ducal fiefs, etc. Because we do have a couple of planets that are mentioned. Is it the one to do with Ginas? I think as much we've got planets with more than one house on them. So often you get a sense in Dune that a planet equals that house, and everybody's just happy to be underneath him. So in that sense, as much as he's a duke, I suppose on Caladan, Leto is the equivalent to a king. And I suppose you can't have too many kings, so you make them all dukes when you have an emperor, don't we? But yes, and as I said, his focus inside, outside, this external, internal kind of thing. He comes across as a really pathetic figure, I think, in this chapter, massively. It's like a whoa, what's happened here? Who is this guy? Real. Almost as if there's been a physical decline in him, and we see that just in the slump and the shoulders, etc. But he's definitely distracted, and even with Paul having a hard time, kind of, what are you at? One thing to another. We jump about what how to rule, how to make film base, ethical, moral law, becoming a renegade, becoming this, should have married your mom. Oh, I'm going to, and he gives it, certainly even the discussions that he presents with Paul about, his mother and that excuses, and again, I genuinely think the real contrast, as it seems almost that Leto was darkening, and if you see the darkness, even within his eyes, that the darkness is around him and it's enveloping him, it's taking him. At the same time, where Paul's kind of light is starting to grow, if you like, in that sense. Paul's the one here who comes across. It's almost an inversion of how a father should talk to his son. Come on, son, cheer up. You know, it's not that bad. This kind of thing. But this is the son talking to the father, and acting in a much more, a little bit of Leto's temper comes out in Paul, but often it's just a little short, speaks quickly, I think, in anger. That's all. But otherwise, Paul is a lot more measured and controlled here, and certainly comes off as the more mature of the two. And it's almost that if Leto was running House Atreides at this point, you'd almost kind of want to replace him, wouldn't you? It almost brings up that kind of suggestion that if things didn't go the way they do in the book, would maybe Paul bump off his dad? Not that I think he's like that, but it's that kind of universe, isn't it? You know. But there we go. Well, listen, folks, that's the end of that rather short chapter, and I've got a massive chapter to look at for the next time, which is going to take me a fair bit of effort, I believe. Where are we? Chapter 15, all to do with Dr. Leto Kynes and that very good epigraph to do with Irulan and Shaddam the Fourth. But we're making good progress throughout the book at the moment, and this is a big one, isn't it? I think. Yeah, I've got my work cut out for Sunday. So just to update you a wee bit, I'll not be doing a Science Fiction Friday tomorrow because I've got all this work to do for this. And it was also just to let you know that as much as I've been going on about my Alfred Bester video for a wee while sorry, not my Alfred Bester video, my video on Tiger, the Stars, My Destination. So we have all of that audio recorded and edited, and we're putting the video together now. So I'm hoping that we'll have it within the next couple of days for you, completed and rendered. It usually takes a wee while to render. We'll get with the Dune Book Club again on Sunday for chapter 15. We get to finally meet Dr. Leto Kynes. And yeah, it's a very interesting chapter. And I'm hoping that I have enough paper in this notebook really to get me to the end, because otherwise we'll have filled this up so far. We're not even through book 1 of Dune. But there we go. So I won't be online tomorrow night, guys, simply put, because I'm going to be doing a whole pile of work on the video and working away towards the book club for Sunday, because it's a big chapter. So it'll probably take me a better part of a day to go through and annotate it. So hopefully I will see you all on Sunday at 9 o'clock GMT, where we'll get on with this chapter. It's going to be a really interesting one. And we'll figure out when we're going to put up the next video, but it should be within the next couple of days. So we'll either have it up before the Dune Book Club, or we'll maybe set it up for a premiere just after or something like that for a bit of fun. But there we go, folks. So thank you very much for joining me as always. And no matter where you are, look after yourselves and take care of each other and be safe. And all the very best. And thanks very much for joining me. Good night now. Bye-bye. Do 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 do. Ba ba ba